Okay, well, I'm delighted to say we're joined on Climate Change TV by the head of the Netherlands delegation, Goote. Welcome to Climate Change TV. Now, there's been a lot of confusion about these negotiations for the past few days. Can you shed any light on how we're looking with two and a half days to go?
Yeah, it is. It seems confusing. That's because there's a lot of groups talking. There's a lot of issues. I think the advantage for this week is that we've closed off the subsidiary bodies of last week. So we're now focusing on the big ticket issues. But it is confusing. But at the same time, the goal is very clear. And I think that in these, now that the ministers have arrived and the state secretaries, we are in the end game, so to speak. And I think that we will get clarity as time progresses. The Indaba that the South African hosts have started is helpful in that sense because it brings together everyone, and we're focusing on the pending issues. So confusing on one hand, but we're all geared towards Friday at the end, and we know that we have to deliver. So there is some order in the chaos, so to speak.
I guess the question is, deliver what? Is there too much being placed on the idea of having a second commitment period to the Kyoto Protocol?
Well, it's clear that we have to avoid a gap. Science tells us that we have to step up as a global community our efforts to fight climate change. But to us, to the Netherlands, but to the EU, it's clear that although we're very open to consider a second commitment period of the Kyoto Protocol, that in itself is not enough. So I don't think there's too much on our plate. I think it's very clear that we have to make a joint effort. Kyoto is part of that prolongation of Kyoto. But at the same time, we have to have a clear roadmap that gives us an indication of where we're going as a global community, not just the Kyoto parties.
UK Minister Greg Barker told us yesterday he didn't think any legally binding treaty could be on the table before, say, 2015. Is it a possibility that Kyoto may be, in a sense, suspended? The original legally binding mechanisms within that would still work for the next 2 years, but no progress would be made until 2015?
Well, that's why I keep referring to that roadmap. It's clear that we cannot agree on a new treaty here, but we have to have the security and the perspective is that we are going to work towards something in that sense. So in the meantime, of course, and that's what we've been saying as an EU all along, in the meantime, the issues and the instruments of the Kyoto Protocol remain important. They're dear to our hearts. We've integrated all the operational elements of Kyoto in our European legislation. So we have to find a sensible and effective combination of the elements of Kyoto and the clear and unambiguous agreement on a roadmap of where we're going. And if they can go in tandem, then I think we have the comfort and the perspective on a useful solution.
How much can we read into countries' press releases in an event like this? China a couple of days ago said they were willing to consider a legally binding treaty, which was greeted in some quarters by sort of acclaim, and other quarters a lot of cynicism. What did you read into the Chinese statement that they would consider a legally binding treaty?
Well, it's always difficult to interpret what other countries are saying. You have to ask China that question. For us, it's a hopeful and good sign that China is going into that direction. We're impressed by what China is doing nationally. But for us, it's clear when it comes to that roadmap that I've been saying that we cannot take that next step without China. So one way or the other, we're in this together. This is a global problem, so we have to find a global solution. And China, of course, like the EU, like the US, and like other countries, have to be on board to make our response effective.
Now, many people look to the EU, of which the Netherlands is a small but crucial part of the EU, as one of the leading drivers in these negotiations. Do you sense, do you see EU unity when you're talking to your fellow ministers, and do you think there is enough ambition shown from the EU in these talks?
Certainly there's unity. The message is a message from the Council of Ministers, so that's a collective message, and it's been clear all along. The step under the Kyoto Protocol together with a roadmap, so I mean there is unity there. In terms of the level of ambition, we're happy that other regions, most recently Australia, are taking ambitious steps. We've integrated our ambition in our legislation for a while now, and we have a 20% reduction by 2020. We've been saying all along that we're willing to step that effort up to 30% by 2020 if others join us. I think that is an ambitious message, and the offer is still on the table.
Okay, and finally looking at some of the other aspects that could be decided here. Green Climate Fund is something that is I imagine still on the table. How do you see that progressing in the negotiations? There's been a lot of talk about public against private finance debates, but what is the situation as far as you and the Netherlands are concerned?
Well, I think I'm happy you're asking that question, because we tend to forget that apart from that bigger picture, apart from that discussion about the legal form, a lot of valuable work has been done in the last couple of days, last week, and even now in the corridors and smaller rooms. And that's how we built this regime. This is a step-by-step approach, and there's a lot of valuable work being done by officials here as it relates to setting up a new adaptation committee when it comes to capacity building, when it comes to national communications. So the list is very long, and of course finance. You mentioned the fund is a crucial part of that end package. But I am optimistic that we can take that step. As you know, a lot of the work has been prepared by the Transitional Committee. Parties here are embracing that. I think that's important. We have to operationalize that fund as soon as possible. And I think, again, the issue around the fund will be a crucial element of success here in Durban at the end of this week.
You were telling me before this interview that you've been involved in this process for nigh on eight years. Give us an idea, and you've got a legal background too, give us an idea of how technically difficult and technically frustrating this process is, particularly when you take into consideration the number of countries involved.
Well, first of all, you have to be an optimist in this work. It's not easy to move as a global community, but we've proven as a global community that we can face and solve big problems. And so I'm confident that within the UN and as a UN, we continue to make progress. The decision making here within the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change does need improvement. I'm very much in favor of looking again at the way we take decisions. Currently, the only way to take decisions is by consensus. Now, climate change affects us all, so everyone has to be on board, but everyone has to be able to sit at the table to talk. At the end of the day, we also have to be effective as a global community. So I think that we need to look at the rules again. I think I'm in favor, and the Netherlands is in favor, of getting a voting rule that allows us to move forward, and I hope that will make the process more effective, because there is a little bit of a deficit there, to say it diplomatically.
A couple of countries proposed that last week, but I take it, just an assumption here, you would need a consensus to agree on that rule.
That is true, yes.
Okay, and just finally, Connie Hedegaard said a few days ago that she didn't expect a decision until perhaps the early hours of Saturday morning. How do you see that all playing out, and how does your role change over the next couple of days? What will you be up to?
Well, I'm here to support my state secretary, who's involved, who's responsible for our climate change and energy policies in the Netherlands. He will, of course, be taking part in the decision-making process. We'll end on Friday at 6 o'clock, perhaps 5 minutes past 6. No, I'm kidding. We have a long tradition, of course, of going late into the night. I wouldn't be surprised this week if we will run late, but it's worth it if we, at the end of that long night on Friday, come out with a good and solid next step.
And just finally, what are those key issues that you think will be still discussed in the early hours of Saturday morning? What issues are still, stopping the process moving forward?
Well, I think that the final issues that we will be discussing are the ones that we've been talking about already. How can we make progress under the Kyoto Protocol? How can we build a solid, clear roadmap when it comes to the future under the convention? How can we construct a solid and effective financial package? If those three issues can come together, I think we will have a successful outcome.